Hello, hello, hello. This is Danny Ceballos with Unleashed Consulting and the Best Boss Bootcamp podcast. Welcome, listeners. We're delighted to have you here, and I'm particularly delighted to be interviewing a friend that I've known for many, many years and a colleague from years ago too. This is Kim-Monique Johnson, and Kim-Monique and I are going to be speaking about the documentary that's on Netflix called White Hot. And we're paying attention to that particular documentary because we think it lends itself to a lot of interesting conversations and insights around diversity, equity, inclusivity in 2022. So welcome, Kim-Monique.
Hello, Danny. Good to be with you. Thank you so much for inviting
Awesome.
me.
Oh, my pleasure. Absolutely. I'm so excited for this conversation. So let me tell you a little bit about Kim-Monique before we get going here. So Kim-Monique has integrated over 25 years of organizational development experience to inspire leaders to bring out the best in themselves and others. She uses meeting facilitation, coaching, and human resources expertise to help organizations manage, change, implement diversity, racial equity, and inclusion strategies, and develop its leaders to create a culture of belonging. She's a senior consultant currently with Community Resource Exchange serving nonprofits in New York City. Kim-Monique also has a private practice as a certified coach, helping new managers and seasoned executives who face challenges related to diversity, racial equity, and inclusion. For leaders who wonder how to show up as their authentic selves, for people of color who may also be part of LGBTQ plus communities, she offers coaching to help them overcome obstacles to their success. So, Kim-Monique, that's just a little bit about who you are. And I'm wondering if you want to add to that. Anything else that you want to add to your bio? Maybe
Oh,
a little bit
wow.
about each other.
Oh, my goodness. Thank you so much. The first thing I think I'd like to say as I listen to my own bio is I actually describe myself more, Danny, as a recovering HR professional. I'm like HR in recovery all over, and it has a lot to do with just so much that has changed in human resources, so much that has changed just in the workplace. So as we talk about this documentary, I was looking at it with the HR lens of, oh my God, that was illegal, that was illegal. And yet even
Interesting.
today, just the conversations that we have in the workplace is just so different. So yeah, that's a lot of where
Yeah,
I am right now.
that's terrific, Monique. And I so appreciate the fact that you call yourself a recovered or in
In
recovery.
recovery, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe a little bit more. So, can you
Yeah.
say a little bit about so all of our listeners are in one way or another involved in HR, whether it's through the hiring, the
Yeah.
retention, or the firing. How are HR practices not working or not
Mm.
relevant
Mm-hmm.
now with our
Mm-hmm.
DEI efforts? How are they broken?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'll answer that by stepping way back a bit, right? And this is something that came upon me during the pandemic as I was, like many of us, like listening to podcasts and deepening my understanding about what it meant to show up as a professional, given all that, team members and employees were challenged with, right? That on
Hmm.
top of George Floyd being brutally murdered, right? And
Yes.
the uprising. So I started to really center myself on, okay, what does it mean just to be a human being in this world right now? And then what does it mean to be a Black gay woman in this world right now? And also, by the way, have to show up at work, right? And
Hmm.
lead a team, have a team. And so as I was listening to podcasts, I came across the podcast 1619. And
Oh,
Danny, I came across, the origins of not only human resources, but basically the origins of business management. And for you and I, we started we worked together in nonprofit, and even some very large nonprofits, even some small ones, actually run like a business, right?
yes,
And when I
yes,
learned that the origins of business management, and then of course human resources, dates back to enslaved peoples.
yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
right? Like, this blew my mind. It was like, okay, so we know, like, the old adage, yeah, this country was built on the backs of slaves. Okay, we hear that. But this particular researcher, Caitlin Rosenthal, she laid out how the supervisory role or the manager role came out of enslavement, came out of a need to have people manage people's productivity, right? Quote, supervise them in such a way that then we extracted and built business practices off of that.
Ah, wow. Yeah. So from its very inception, even the name, I've always thought human resources, and it suggests this notion
Yeah.
of the machine and using people in ways that may not come from their best self. It's very,
Yes.
very interesting.
Yes.
Yeah,
That's and you're exactly right. That's what started to blow my mind, and that's why I was like, oh, I need a group. I need a
yeah,
support group as an HR person because I definitely need to be in recovery because you're exactly right. People
yeah,
were treated as human resources. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Not as humans.
So that's so fascinating. So it's not, and we're not here to disparage human resources, right? We've got probably professionals
Yes.
listening to this. We know that it's a tough job, no matter how you cut it. But it is interesting. I've been thinking about during the pandemic and how as we're slowly coming into this new place with the pandemic, how we're rethinking work
Mm-hmm.
and how what it actually brings for us and what we bring to our organizations and our work. And I'm loving that. I actually love that. I
Absolutely.
think that it's a high time that we stop looking at work as this regimented
Yes.
9 to 6 or more likely 8 to 7 kind of thing, and
Yes.
start to think about it in terms of the holistic contribution that we make to our organizations, to our clients, to our customers. Yeah.
Yes,
So
yes. Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Look, I am so supportive of my colleagues who are in HR and those of us who are on the recovery spectrum, right? So it is absolutely the recognition that we have a very unique role. And this is how it showed up during the pandemic, right? Like how many organizations, how many HR professionals and managers said during the pandemic, you know what, take care of yourself, right?
yeah,
How many of us in HR said, well, you get to work from home as a perk. You've got to work for an organization for for a certain amount of time, and then you get to earn that right. And then we were
right,
celebrating, those of us in
right.
HR, who would try to convince our leadership all along, we knew that remote work was actually more beneficial for employees and for the organization. As HR folks, we kind of knew that, right?
Right. Right.
And,
Yeah. But
and
the
so
world is catching up.
the world is catching up, and so I think we absolutely have a unique role to be able to really address, the inequities and some of
Mhm.
the racist history that we are best, I think, suited to really, resolve or to at least
Mhm.
offer some solutions around. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. That's an optimistic way, I think. Because I
Hmm.
think there is every reason to be optimistic. We're going through the throes of change. That's no fun. Nobody wants that. There's a great quote by Peter Senge who says, people don't resist change, they resist being changed. And that's
Hmm.
where we are right now. We're in this place. But
Hmm.
my senses, my spidey sense says that we'll come out of this better in
Mm.
terms of how we relate to work and how work relates to us.
Mhm,
So,
mhm. I hope so. I hope so. I also
yeah.
was thinking about a lot of quotes too during it, and the quote about this pandemic having been a portal by Arundhati Roy, right? That we can really look
Mm,
at this as an opportunity to like create something new, right? To stitch a new garment as well, is what Sonia Renee Taylor says, right? So this is like we don't have to replicate, what was because what was wasn't so good anyway. You know what I mean?
right. Yes, exactly.
What
Exactly.
wasn't
Terrific.
normal, so we have an opportunity to create
That's right.
something new.
That's right. That's right. So let's stick with that theme of around what was, what
Yeah.
is, and what will be as we
Mhm.
start to unpack this documentary. Now, I know
Yeah.
listeners who may not have seen the documentary that we're talking about, White Hot. I think I would recommend it. I will see if Kim-Monique recommends it. We've just talked about it briefly. But one of the reasons that I asked Kim-Monique to actually unpack that with me on the podcast is because I think it speaks to how things were,
Mhm.
how things are and can be, and how things hopefully will be or can
Mm.
be.
Mhm.
So yeah, so Kim-Monique, can you tell folks what we were talked about right before we started recording, what you were saying, what your impressions were of this documentary, which again is about Abercrombie and Fitch,
Mhm.
right? For those of you that don't know, which is, I don't how do we describe it without being disparaging? It's a
Yeah, well, it was well, maybe it still is now. They've been rebranded, of course, now, right? But yeah, they were a clothing company that had a particular brand. At the end of the documentary, it basically sums it up. It said their brand was based on exclusion, right?
yes, yes,
Based
yes,
on
exactly.
exclusion. And so they were very explicit about who they would hire. They were very explicit about their marketing. They're very explicit about their product, who their product would be for. And they made the case and made it very clear. that it
Right.
was to appeal to so-called all-American cool kids, young white children, young white teens between 18 and 22, something like that, right?
Yes. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So how does that? So I think that draws a lot of parallel. So first of all, while this was happening, while this marketing was happening, and I remember it, and you remember it,
Mm-hmm.
as you were saying, walking by these stores with
Mm-hmm.
music blaring
Mm-hmm.
and really attractive in a very traditional way, white young men
Mm-hmm.
traditionally, right, usually shirtless,
Mm-hmm.
and they were very clear about their marketing
Mm-hmm.
and they were very clear about their market and they were
Mm-hmm.
very, very successful. Kim-Monique, why didn't we realize this at the time? What was going on here? That
Mm.
this was about exclusion. This was
Mm-hmm.
about, in some ways, it was about a racist
Yeah.
marketing
Right.
plan.
Right.
So why didn't we see that?
Well, because, welcome to America, Danny. I think we didn't see it because it's centered whiteness, right? And that's what we see all around us. So let me give you an example, right? So I remember being in the mall. I'm out here on Long Island, on Lenape land here on Long Island, right? And so it wouldn't be Long Island if we didn't have malls. And so I remember going to the mall, and I remember passing this store that had loud, blaring music. And I remember also, Danny, that you couldn't quite see what was inside the store. It literally had shutters on the entrance. And so I remember going in, and I remember seeing these huge posters of these, young, very svelte, these sexy poses, right? Mostly young men, abs cut, right? And I remember like, okay, I'm used to that. Okay, but where are the clothes, right? And so I'm looking for the clothes, and they were like, this big. And so I said, it took me all of 3 seconds to say, okay, you know what? This store is not for me, right? It's not for me. And so I left. And
Mhm.
so when you ask the question, why did we notice it? Is because I believe that, again, in this country, we are so used to people being told early and quickly and often where you belong and where you don't belong.
Mhm, mhm. Yes, yes. Which I guess is just another way of saying marketing in a lot of ways, right? So, and this podcast will not be about all of that,
Mm-hmm.
because I think that's a wide and deep area to explore.
Mm-hmm.
But there is something I feel like there's still something there about what we can learn from that experience,
Mm-hmm.
from now that we look back at Abercrombie and Fitch and how, and again, folks, really suggest that you watch the documentary to get a real. It's on Netflix, by the way,
Mm-hmm.
to get a sense of what we're talking about. But what are some of the lessons
Yeah.
that we can learn
Mm-hmm.
that my middle managers who are listening to this, middle and senior managers,
Yeah.
can learn
Mm-hmm.
from that?
Yeah. You know what I'll say when I watched it, and I was really feeling the pain for these managers who were interviewed, and really feeling
Yes.
the
Oh
pain
my
for the HR
goodness.
person, right?
Yeah.
And so what I would say to your audience is, the lesson is, listen to your intuition, you know,
Mm.
listen, listen to your gut, listen to what you know, listen to your body. There's a lot of work that we're appreciating now in terms of, the somatics, right? Recognizing how do things feel in your body. And Danny, when they were being interviewed and when they were being told that they would only interview or hire people that looked a certain way, when they were told that they had to take someone off the schedule and only have this Black woman, for example, work at night to never be in front of the customer, right? They were pained when they were sharing those stories. So they knew somewhere in their body, they knew that was not right,
Right.
right?
Right. Right.
And
Yeah.
and I would say pay attention to that, because if it doesn't feel right, it may not be right.
Odds are pretty good that it's not right. Yeah, great. Thank you so much. I'm wondering, Kim-Monique, if you
Hmm.
could respond to this. So I was on a training call of some sort. It was a few weeks ago, and we talked about inclusion.
Hmm.
So inclusion by exclusion. Now,
Mm.
we talked about that with the marketing and how that is, clearly that's got not some great
Hmm.
reasons that it's happening. But what do you think of this notion? I mean, they were saying that we need to start thinking about, it's not that we allow everybody in, it's that we're really clear about who we're keeping out in order to get the work done that we need to get done. And
Mm,
sometimes that's about, affirming,
mm,
life affirming work. It doesn't
mm-hmm,
necessarily have to be about the dollar. What do you think about that?
mm, mm. Well, I'd love to hear more, like, what that looks like an example of it. But on the face, what I would say is, there's a determination that someone makes about the value of the folks who they include, and
Yeah.
ultimately, there's a determination about the value of the people that they exclude, right?
Right. Right.
And
Yeah.
and how arrogant is that? you know
Yeah. Yeah.
uh
Yeah.
and how much, ultimately, of course, Abercrombie and Fitch is just one example, but how much loss when you undervalue and underestimate those people who you think, right,
Mm.
don't belong or don't fit
Mm.
or can't
Yeah.
contribute. Yeah.
Yeah, tremendous. Yeah,
Hmm.
excellent. Thank you for responding to that. What do you think? What can we do about that now?
Mm,
So, how can we do that? How can we make sure that? Because I think our managers are still struggling with, well, if you don't buy into this particular value,
mm-hmm,
then it's not going to work for us. But to your point, how do we include folks who have different ways of looking at the world, different ways of communicating, interacting?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's so mixed up in my mind because I know we're better than we were, but in some ways we're exactly the same as we were 10 years ago.
Right,
You
right.
know,
Yeah, exactly. It's like, yeah, we want diversity. Bring in everybody who's different as long as they all act the same. As long as everybody, right?
exactly.
This is our culture. And again, me in recovery, how many times had I been in the HR role and I had to sit with a manager and an employee and have a very difficult conversation about separation because, quote, the
Mm,
person, was no longer a good fit, right?
mm, mm,
What
mhm.
is that? Yeah.
Right,
So
right.
to managers and for myself, what I had to learn is, actually, it's more of an advantage to our team, to our company, to our organization to look for someone who's not a fit. Why?
Yeah.
Because they can bring in new ideas, creativity, things you haven't thought of, right? Innovation happens when there's going to be this disruption. So that would be one, I would say, sort of like approach to lean into. And then the second thing, Danny, is the most important thing is, once that difference does join your team, and you do have that difference on your team, then you need to make sure that people don't want to run for the hills. You need to make sure that they're not going to be made to feel like they're different, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yes.
they need to be encouraged to be who they are and celebrated, and not to be like, oh, reminded every day, you're different.
Mm. Right, right. Yeah, it's about getting the right people in, but it's also about the retention of those folks. And so it's not, yeah, I
Hmm.
had a boss that used to say, before you invite people into your house, you got to make sure your house is clean first.
Absolutely, I love that, because you know what, a lot of questions would be asked. Well, how do we hire more people of color? How do we get more gay folk to join our organization? The first question I would always ask is, well, why would they want to?
There you go. There you go. Love that. Love that. Dominique, what do you think? So, looking into your crystal ball, what do you think will be our DEI efforts, our diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging efforts? 10 years from now, where do you think we'll be? What do you think we'll be doing?
Wow. Well, what I hope we'll be doing starting now to help get to 10 years is, I hope that we will do a lot more self reflection. I think that what we can do most earnestly is just allow ourselves to be vulnerable, allow ourselves to get it wrong, allow ourselves to be learners. And to recognize that the work is not academic, right? It's not like, it's not about the content. It's not about, you know, um, policies. Yes, I think more of it is about just that human connection. And
Mhm.
again, as managers, to be vulnerable and to recognize, I may not get it right, but I'm learning and growing. And how can we do this learning and growing together?
Excellent.
Sounds fluffy, Danny, but if we're not starting with that openness, I don't know how we can get to anything else.
I agree. I agree. Thank you so much for that. So, Kim-Monique, we're gonna wrap up, but I want to ask you three questions before we do that. So,
Sure.
the three questions are: what would you say our managers need to do right now, as soon as they finish this podcast? What is something that they can do to make a difference in their DEI work?
Hmm.
Secondly, you have a resource, a favorite resource, a study, a book, or something that you would recommend to our audience?
Hmm.
And then, thirdly, how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah. Wow. Right now. So I'm really leaning into slowing down as a right now. You know,
Okay.
I'm leaning into pushing back against some of the white dominant norms that we've all inherited. Again, it comes from a place. It doesn't mean that, folks who are replicating some of these norms are troubled or bad people or labeled. It means racism is the water, it's not the shark. You know what I mean? And so I think right now what people can do is slow down, take a look around and assess, how am I showing up, right? How does my identity impact, what I say and do, and how welcoming am I to other people to express who they are? Because that's going to be the way by which people are either going to join your organization or your team or leave. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's what I say. First and foremost, slow down, take a look around, assess where you are, how are you showing up.
Excellent. That's
Hmm.
awesome. Thank you.
Sure, sure.
And the second question, do you have a favorite resource or a study, a book, a movie, something besides the documentary that we're talking about that
Sure,
you would
sure, sure.
recommend?
My favorite resource lately is Nonprofit Quarterly. So that's been my world, nonprofit, right? The nonprofit space, and they have totally transformed. They have put out some resources, some materials. I don't mean to be self-serving, but I will say there's an article that I was fortunate enough to have uh, published in Nonprofit Quarterly. Aside from that, they're being really explicit about dismantling anti-blackness. They're being really explicit about dismantling racism. They're being super explicit about liberation as opposed to just let's move away from being racist. I mean, it's just amazing how they are positioning teachings from queer communities of color in Nonprofit Quarterly. So I would say pick that up, check that out online. Nonprofit Quarterly is a resource
You
that
know,
I've been going to.
yeah, I haven't looked at NPQ in a long time. That's great to hear,
You'll be
actually. I mean,
surprised.
thank you. Yeah, that's really does my heart good. And then
Hmm.
lastly, Kim-Monique, if folks
Yeah.
want to hear some more from you or talk to you or see more about what you're doing, how can they best get in touch with you or see what you're doing?
Yeah, thanks so much. Best way to go to my website, intervisionscoaching.com, intervisionscoaching.com. Yes, named after Stevie Wonder, whose birthday is coming up. Just a little bit about me. And so I'm not too active on the socials, but I'm on Instagram at K-Monique K-Monique on Instagram.
Awesome. We will definitely be putting that in the show notes, so we'll be make sure to get that in there for folks. And Kim-Monique, what was the article that you helped contribute to in the MPQ?
Oh, thank you. It's called How to Be an Anti-Racist Supervisor. Start with changing what you call yourself.
That is the perfect. All right, so I'm hoping that you'll send to me the link so that we
I
can
will.
put that in the show notes because that sounds like the perfect article for my folks to read.
Oh, wow. Thank you, Danny. Thank you so
Yeah,
much. Thank you.
seriously. Yeah,
I'm so inspired. Thank you so much. Yes. Well, still
awesome.
still learning and growing. Still working on my active recovery.
Very awesome. Love that. Yes. I join you in I support your recovery, however I
Thank you. Thank you.
Kim Monique, thank you so much. It was delightful to spend some time with you, and I love that we're looking at things in an optimistic framework. That we're thinking that
Absolutely.
we're in the middle of change, but there's so many good things that are coming out, and we learned just a little bit from the White Hot documentary about what
Yes.
to
What
do,
not to
right?
do. Yeah, 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 exactly. And what to do in terms of speaking up and speaking out. There were some activists in that film too that were really inspiring. So, yeah. Thank
That's
you,
right.
Danny. Thank you for the
Thank you
work that
so
you
much.
do.
Thank you. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to the Best Boss Bootcamp podcast. We'll see you next time. This is Danny Ceballos with Unleashed Consulting. Bye now.